ephemeral. If there is no God, then any ground for regarding the herd morality evolved by Homo sapiens on this planet as objectively true seems to have been removed. After all, on the atheistic view, what's so special about human beings? They're just accidental byproducts of nature which have evolved relatively recently on an infinitesimal speck of dust called the planet Earth, lost somewhere in a hostile and mindless universe in which are doomed to perish individually and collectively in a relatively short time. On the atheistic view, some action like rape may have, in the course of human development, become taboo, but there's nothing really wrong with committing rape. If, as Kurtz states, the moral principles that govern our behavior are rooted in habit and custom, feeling and fashion, then the nonconformist who chooses to flout the herd morality is doing nothing more serious than being unfashionable. The objective worthlessness of human beings on a naturalistic view is underscored by two implications of that view: materialism and determinism. Naturalists are typically materialists or physicalists who regard man as a purely physical organism. But if man has no immaterial aspect to his being, call it soul or mind or what have you, then he's not qualitatively different from other animal species. For him to regard human morality as objective is to fall into the trap of speciesism. On a naturalistic, materialistic anthropology, there's no reason to think that human beings are objectively more valuable than horses or rodents. Secondly, if there is no mind distinct from the brain, then everything we think and do is determined by the input of our five senses and our genetic makeup. There is no personal agent who freely decides to do something. As Richard Dawkins so powerfully puts it, there is at bottom no design, no purpose, no evil, no good, nothing but pointless indifference. We are machines for propagating DNA. It is every living object's sole reason for being. Without freedom, none of our choices is morally significant. They're like the jerks of a puppet's limbs, controlled by the input of sensory stimuli and physical constitution. And what moral value does a puppet or its movements have? Thus, if atheism is true, it becomes impossible to condemn war, oppression, or crime as evil, nor can one praise brotherhood, equality, or love as good. It does not matter what values you choose, for there is no right and wrong. Good and evil do not exist. That means that an atrocity like the Holocaust was really morally indifferent. You may think that it was wrong, but your opinion has no more validity than that of the Nazi war criminal who thought that it was right. In his book, Morality After Auschwitz, Peter Haas asks how an entire society could have willingly participated in a state-sponsored program of mass torture and genocide for over a decade without any serious opposition. He argues that, and I quote, "Far from being contemptuous of ethics, the perpetrators acted in strict conformity with an ethic which held that however difficult and unpleasant the task might have been, mass extermination of the Jews and Gypsies was entirely justified. The Holocaust, as a sustained effort, was possible only because a new ethic was in place that did not define the arrest and deportation of Jews as wrong, and in fact defined it as ethically tolerable and even good." Moreover, Haas points out, because of its coherence and internal consistency, the Nazi ethic could not be discredited from within. Only from a transcendent vantage point which stands above relativistic socio-cultural mores, could such a critique be launched. But in the absence of God, it is precisely such a transcendent vantage point that we lack. One rabbi who was imprisoned at Auschwitz said that it was as though there was a world in which all the 10 commandments had been reversed. Thou shalt kill, thou shalt steal, thou shalt lie. Mankind has never seen such a hell. And yet, in a real sense, if there is no God, then our world is Auschwitz. There is no good and evil. There is no right and wrong. Objective moral values do not exist. Finally, if atheism is true, there is no moral accountability for one's actions. Even if there were objective moral values and duties under atheism, they're irrelevant because there is no moral accountability. If life ends at the grave, it makes no difference whether one has lived as a Stalin or as a saint. As the Russian writer Fyodor Dostoevsky rightly said, if there is no immortality, then all things are permitted. The state torturers in Soviet prisons understood this all too well. Richard Wurmbrand, who was tortured in communist prisons, writes as follows: "The cruelty of atheism is hard to believe when men have no faith in the reward of good or the punishment of evil. There is no reason to be human. There is no restraint from the depths of evil which is in man. The communist torturers often said, 'There is no God, no hereafter, no punishment for evil. We can do what we wish.' I have heard one torturer even say, 'I thank God in whom I don't believe, that I have lived to this hour when I can express all the evil in my heart.' He expressed it in unbelievable brutality and torture inflicted on prisoners." Given the finality of death, it really does not matter how you live. So what do you say to someone who concludes that we may as well just live as we please out of pure self-interest? This presents a pretty grim picture for an atheistic ethicist like Kai Nielsen of the University of Calgary. Nielsen writes, "We have not been able to show that reason requires the moral point of view, or that all really rational persons should not be individual egoists or classical amoralists. Reason doesn't decide here. The picture I have painted for you is not a pleasant one. Reflection on it depresses me. Pure, practical reason, even with a good knowledge of the facts, will not take you to morality." Now, somebody might say that it's in our best self-interest to adopt a moral lifestyle. But clearly, that's not always true. We all know situations in which self-interest runs smack in the face of morality. Moreover, if one is sufficiently powerful, like a Ferdinand Marcos or a Papadoc Duvalier or even a Donald Trump, then one can pretty much ignore the dictates of conscience and safely live in self-indulgence. Historian Stuart C. Easton sums it up well when he writes, "There is no objective reason why man should be good unless morality pays off in his social life or makes him feel good. There is no objective reason why man should do anything save for the pleasure it affords him." Acts of self-sacrifice become particularly inept on an atheistic worldview. Why should you sacrifice your self-interest, and especially your life, for the sake of someone else? There can be no good reason on atheism for adopting such a self-negating course of action. Considered from the socio-biological point of view, such altruistic behavior is merely the result of evolutionary conditioning, which helps to perpetuate the species. A mother rushing into a burning house to save her child, or a soldier throwing his body over a hand grenade to save his comrades, does nothing more significant or praiseworthy, morally speaking, than a fighter ant which sacrifices itself for the sake of the anthill. Common sense dictates that we should resist, if we can, the socio-biological pressures to such self-destructive activity, and choose instead to act in our own self-interest. The philosopher of religion, John Hick, invites us to imagine an ant suddenly endowed with the insights of sociobiology and the freedom to make personal decisions. Hick writes, "Suppose him to be called upon to immolate himself for the sake of the anthill. He feels the powerful pressure of instinct pushing him towards this self-destruction. But he asks himself, why should he voluntarily carry out the suicidal program to which instinct prompts him? Why should he regard the future existence of a million other ants as more important to him than his own continued existence, since all that he is and has or ever can have is his own present existence? Surely, insofar as he is free from the domination of the blind force of instinct, he will opt for life, his own life." Now, why on atheism should we act any differently? Life is too short to jeopardize it by acting out of anything but pure self-interest. Sacrifice for another person is just stupid. And thus the absence of moral accountability from the philosophy of atheism makes an ethic of compassion and self-sacrifice a hollow abstraction. R.Z. Friedman, a philosopher at the University of Toronto, concludes, "Without religion, the coherence of an ethic of compassion cannot be established. The principle of respect for persons and the principle of survival of the fittest are mutually exclusive." We thus come to radically different perspectives upon morality, depending upon whether or not God exists. If God exists, then there is a sound foundation for morality. If God does not exist, then, as Friedrich Nietzsche saw, we are ultimately landed in nihilism. But the choice between these two need not be arbitrarily made. On the contrary, the very considerations that we've been discussing this evening can constitute moral justification for belief in the existence of God. For example, if we do think that objective moral values exist, then we shall be led logically to the conclusion that God exists. And could anything be more obvious than the fact that objective moral values do exist? There's no more reason to deny the objective reality of moral values than the objective reality of the physical world. The reasoning of Michael Ruse that I quoted is at worst a textbook example of the genetic fallacy, which is the fallacy of trying to invalidate a point of view by showing how it originated. And at best, it only proves that our subjective apprehension of moral values has evolved. But if moral values are gradually discovered rather than invented, then such a gradual and fallible apprehension of the objective moral realm no more undermines the objective reality of that realm than our gradual, fallible apprehension of the physical world undermines the objectivity of that realm. The fact is that we do apprehend a realm of objective moral values and duties, and I think we all know it. Actions like rape, torture, child abuse, and brutality aren't just socially unacceptable behavior. They're moral abominations. As Michael Ruse himself has elsewhere stated, the man who says that it is morally acceptable to rape little children is just as mistaken as the man who says 2 + 2 = 5. By the same token, love, generosity, equality, and self-sacrifice are really good. And people who fail to see this are just morally handicapped, like colorblind people. And there's no reason to allow their impaired vision